Science is the great antidote to the poison of enthusiasm and superstition. Hi, I'm Juliette Sellgren, and this is my podcast, The Great Antidote, named for Adam Smith, brought to you by Liberty Fund. To learn more, visit www.adamsmithworks.org. Welcome back. The media seems to constantly be buzzing about energy, everything from where we get it to how we store it to how much we have to what to do with it. But today, on February 8th, 2023, I'm excited to welcome Eli Dourado back to the podcast to talk to us about energy superabundance, from what it is to how we get there. Eli is a senior research fellow at the Center for Growth and Opportunity at Utah State University. Still and always will be a mouthful. And he has a blog, elidourado.com. Go check that out. Welcome back.
Thanks, Juliette. Great to be with you again.
So, before we get started, what's the most important thing that people my age or in my generation should know that we don't?
I think it's that the world in the future could be better, right? And it matters what we do today to get it there. So it will be better if and only if we take the appropriate actions now. And the reason the world is not better now than what it could be is that people didn't take the appropriate actions in the past, right? Like we've been stagnating economically for the last 50 years. So you can blame past generations, and you can choose to take the right actions, to take a different course, and get us back on track.
This ties in so nicely to what we're going to be talking about. So let's jump right in. I want to clarify some things first. What is energy, and what parts of our lives does energy touch? It's kind of a simple question.
We could back way up, right? Like energy is like a fundamental property of the universe, right? It's like one of the fundamental quantities that exists in physics, right? Matter and energy are kind of the big things that physics is concerned with. But I think how we think about it in society and in non-physical terms, it's like the ability to harness our ability to harness and master that like sort of fundamental physical quantity, right? And so to harness it for human ends and to use it for our own purposes. So within energy, I think there's like lots of different kinds of energy. There's lots of distinctions. There's like primary energy, and sometimes we measure just electricity and not primary energy. So primary energy would count the energy that you use to generate electricity, which usually costs you some additional energy to convert certain kinds of energy into electricity. There's energy that's available for different kinds of uses. So there's energy that is available for sort of a stationary use, like electricity on the grid, or there's gasoline in your car, which is mobile, right? There's batteries, which are mobile. There's different form factors. There's all different kinds of batteries and different chemistries that allow the batteries to have different properties in terms of how fast they can charge and recharge, how much the battery weighs for the amount of energy that's in it, and so on. So there's I think a wide array of different kinds of energy that we're concerned with, but broadly it's about harnessing the physical quantities of the universe for our own ends.
And so, I mean, there's gas in my car and there's battery in my phone, but it impacts things like food also, right? And just
absolutely,
human movement. And
yes,
right.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we use energy to make fertilizer, right? Which without which we wouldn't be able to grow as much food as we do. We wouldn't be able to support as many people on the planet. We use it for tractors. We use it for, construction. We use it for just so many fundamental things. We use it, obviously we use energy for transportation, for moving around. If I think a lot about like, what if we didn't have transportation systems that could, fly you across an ocean in a day or less, right? What would happen to global commerce? Like it would I think you would have like way fewer international business deals if you didn't have business travel, right? And just the scope of the human ability to cooperate, to trade, to sort of have like this extensive economic network, that would all collapse and we would all be poor. So energy is in a way, I think in a deep way, it's kind of is really fundamental to our standard of living.
And I mean, what's so beautiful about it, and what you communicated so well in your explanation of what it is that it's such a fundamental part of the world we live in, and the fact that humans were able to essentially capture it and utilize it by changing the direction where it moved, where it went, what it did. That's crazy and beautiful to me. So then, what is energy superabundance?
Well, so that's the title of a paper that I wrote with my colleague Austin Vernon, who's now a senior visiting fellow with CGO, and we kind of we started by really noting the fact that energy, total aggregate primary energy consumption in the U.S. has actually declined over the last 45 years or so. So it was the sort of peaked in 1977 or 1978. And, I think that, the economy has obviously grown since then. So we are doing more with less, you could say. But we kind of wanted to look at the question of, what would it be like to do more with more? Like how would like sort of our basic economic recipes change if we could have more energy instead of, less? So instead of, basically instead of trying to do like kind of the same thing we're doing now, except with like slightly more efficiently and with like a little bit less resource use, what if the resource just were not that scarce in the first place, and we could afford to waste more, right? We could afford to take it to lower value marginal uses. How would things be different? And so we're kind of trying to decide how we define superabundance. And it kind of, this took me down a road of like looking at how energy works in other countries. And one thing that's really interesting is that, Iceland has a ton of energy because they happen to be located on a volcano, which is really convenient if you want to harness a lot of geothermal energy, and they have a bunch of hydro energy as well, and so and it's very cold in the winter, so they have to use a lot of heating. So they have a very high level of primary energy, both production and consumption, and so we kind of defined it as like, okay, let's keep the standard as 2 times what Iceland has today, right? And assume what would the world be like if the U.S. or everyone had twice Iceland's current rate of primary energy consumption, and that's kind of where we drew the line as like, okay, that's when you're really talking about superabundance.
So then, I guess like, why? Not why do we want superabundance, because you explain that, but can you tell us about what would come with having superabundance? What does that world look like?
Well, it's a world where we do a lot of things differently than we do today, right? So we kind of go through a bunch of different sectors of the economy. We talk about in the paper, like, what does this mean for transportation? What does it mean for agriculture, for water, for materials, new cities. So I think it's different across a lot of different sectors. It's hard to sum up, but it's a much wealthier world. It's one where, we are doing a lot more transportation of both goods and people, and taking things around the globe, faster for cargo, more last mile delivery for cargo, faster and more convenient transportation for humans, electric flying vehicles, what some people call flying cars, for sort of like taking you around, like regional flights, like supersonic aircraft for long distance flights. I think a lot more agriculture would be done in a controlled environment rather than out in a field somewhere where there could be pests and diseases and stuff, and where you have to use chemical pesticides, right? And we could grow stuff indoors, in a controlled environment, and not have to use as many pesticides and be more efficient with water use and so on. We could, we could end drought, basically everywhere in the world. We could desalinate a lot of water. We could pump it to where it needs to be. In the very worst case scenario, if energy was very cheap, we could condense water out of the air, which is, not a great solution in most cases, but that's basically because energy is so expensive. I think, climate change would cease to be a problem. We would, have all the energy it takes to not only take carbon out of the air, but to start to use the carbon that you isolate from the atmosphere as a new material, as a resource. And once you start, developing processes that use those carbon atoms that are, in the CO2 that's in the atmosphere, you're kind of like, oh, I can do something with that. Then you kind of flip the problem, and you're going to have too many people taking carbon out of the atmosphere, maybe. It changes energy availability, changes where you could live, where on the planet it makes sense to live. It's going to, there's just so many implications, industrial implications, especially for energy, that it really changes how we do everything.
Wait, but why would we want to create more energy and have more energy? Because that means climate change and the end of the world. And I know you said that people will use the carbon, but why don't we just get rid of the carbon in the first place and not create more?
Well, I think that there definitely is going to have to be a transition at some point into cleaner forms of energy. And transition's already underway in terms of people. We're phasing out coal in favor of, both, renewables like natural gas and wind, or solar and wind, but also natural gas as a sort of a bridge fuel. But ultimately, so I think both Austin and I think that clean energy is going to win out in the long run because it's going to be cheaper. So, solar and wind are very, very cheap ways of producing electricity right now. They're not reliable, and there's intermittency problems. But there are other ways to produce electricity that also are cheap and could be cheaper than fossil fuels. For example, nuclear energy is, it's very expensive today because of the regulatory obstacles. But it is, in principle, it's very cheap. Geothermal is something I'm really excited about. It's undergoing sort of a revival now because of advances that we've had in the shale fields. Learning how to frack for natural gas. It turns out that fracking, those techniques are incredibly useful for geothermal as well, and other kinds of subsurface engineering that we're doing for oil and gas. Extremely useful for what we'd call like advanced geothermal. And so ultimately, the sort of the scale at which we're thinking, it both relies on and expects clean energy to be a better way of doing it. One of the things that I did a just a calculation at one point. Sometimes people talk about what's called a Kardashev level 1 civilization, which is like you imagine our civilization is using energy equivalent to the level that like the sun is sending to Earth every day, right? And that would be, that's like 1,000 times more energy than what we're using. If we got to there and we were trying to do that all on fossil fuels, we'd run out of fossil fuels in 45 days. So just, like if you actually care about energy superabundance, it's not going to be fossil fuel based. It's going to be based on other technologies.
Well, so then, I guess my next question is that we already have the government intervening and pushing people towards using cleaner energy sources. How is that working out?
Well, it's not working out very well. I mean, it's working out well in the sense of like there are a ton of subsidies, so it's good for the companies that are trying to do this. Where it's not working out well is that we've made the mistake of introducing subsidies while not removing obstacles. So, for example, one issue that I've worked on a lot is geothermal permitting on federal lands. So if you want to drill a new set of geothermal wells, the normal way to do that is to find some place where there's a good energy resource, like where there's hot under the surface, and a lot of that happens to be on federal land. So you could go to BLM and offer to lease the land and and tell them you want to put a geothermal plant there. To get their permission to do that is a multi-year period. Whereas to do the exact same thing, but to drill for oil and gas, that takes like about 2 weeks. So the permission that you need to deploy some of these energy technologies is what is lagging. And all the subsidies in the world, they're not going to be very effective if you are subsidizing people to run into these obstacles that then hold up the actual deployment of the project. So it's not working well. We have all of these obstacles. They're mostly related to, or a lot of them are related to NEPA, which is the National Environmental Policy Act, which requires environmental reviews before agencies make certain decisions. And then I think also a lot is being held up by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the way we do nuclear licensing in this country. So, nuclear power, I think it should be about 2 cents per kilowatt hour in terms of like how much it costs to generate. If you just sort of take, sort of the physical costs and none of these plants or nuclear power plants are not very complicated in terms of our understanding of them. Like we very, very understand them very well. It would be trivial to from a scientific perspective, trivial to just like build a lot of these. And we're making it very, very hard to license them. And as a consequence, like all the nuclear plants, like people give up, either they give up before they built one or they build one and then they give up and they don't build another one of the same design. And so we basically get only like these super bespoke power plants that cost, 10 cents a kilowatt hour or more. And, the real price should be about 2 cents. So it's not going well. We introduce a lot of obstacles into energy deployment. And that is the main thing that's holding us back.
And I mean, obstacles are a cost as well as, so the goal of government intervention in energy used to be that there would be an abundance of cheap energy. And now it's just a substitute, but there's still this cost of these obstacles. So how is the shifting of that goal? I don't know. Does that have any effect on today's current situation?
Well, I think we live in a time of like really good opportunity for energy. Um, if you think about why, more broadly in the economy, like why we've stagnated for the last 50 years, um, I think that a large part of it is just complacency. Like we haven't been serious. We haven't cared about, hustling and getting stuff done and being able to bear some inconveniences and so on. And I think that's a broad-based phenomenon. That's not like any one person that's at fault. It's like a lot of people. And today, with the climate situation, we have a big chunk of the population that for the first time like is not complacent about something, right? They may have exaggerated views of exactly what the climate problem is. But I think the climate problem is a real problem. It's probably not an existential threat, but if some people think it's an existential threat and they actually want to do something, I think at least they're not complacent. And so I think we're seeing a lot of discussion in Washington, especially in the last couple of years, about how are we going to deploy all this energy, especially now that we've funded it to a massive degree. And we need to get serious about getting rid of some of the obstacles. And so I'm actually really encouraged that there is as I said, for the first time, there's like a significant fraction of the population that actually wants to get stuff done. And so we'll see how it goes. I think it's going to be a while before people realize the depth of the change that needs to happen. But I think I think there's a chance we'll get there.
And you mentioned this stagnation. So how is energy consumption tied to economic growth or economic stagnation?
Oh, great question. So if you I think if you tried to run the US economy today on the energy levels of 200 years ago, you'd find you couldn't do it, right? So energy in some sense is like absolutely necessary for economic activity. And so more energy means you can do more stuff. Now, if you look at sort of the history of both, GDP and energy consumption in the US, GDP or sort of the growth rate in total factor productivity. So the rate at which, we've improved the ability to make goods out of a sort of a fixed basket of inputs. That started to decline in the early 1970s. And energy per capita in the U.S., primary energy per capita peaked in the sort of a couple of years later, 1977 or 1978, and so I think it's absolutely related. There's like we would need more energy to do basically any sort of like significant economic change in the U.S. probably requires a lot more energy. So I think they're very, very closely linked.
And I've read a few places that it's imperative that we succeed at achieving this vision of energy superabundance, and it ties into this idea of stagnation. So, not what happens if we don't succeed, but what would be the costs to us if we don't succeed? I can't find another way to put it.
Well, what I think is most likely is we would just continue to muddle along, right? Like, if you look at the U.S. economy since 2005, so like almost 18 years or so, it has grown very, very slowly. Both in terms of, total factor productivity and in terms of, per capita real GDP. And part of my belief is that slow rate of growth, it exposes, it creates a lot of social problems as well as economic problems. So when the economy is growing fast, everybody feels like a winner. Everybody like wants to play along. Everybody wants to cooperate, contribute to everybody plays the game and plays by the rules because they know that if they just play by the rules for long enough, then they'll get a payoff at the end, right? Their lifestyle, their quality of life will improve because the economy is growing. The whole pie is getting bigger. If you introduce stagnation, or even and I'll note that like a bunch of countries, Juliette, have been regressing in terms of total factor productivity. Like Italy has declined in total factor productivity over the last 20 years. So basically, if you have that kind of environment where people feel like I can play by the rules, I can do my job, like my life still isn't going to get better, there's no way to get ahead, I think that creates an environment where people want to defect instead of cooperate, right? They want to, they'll shift to more of a rent-seeking mode, or they will try to take what other people have instead of trying to create their own value, and that's very damaging for a society. And I think with the slow growth that we've had, especially over the last 18 years, it's I think we see a lot of that in politics. You see more populism, you see more nihilism, frankly, and that's not what we should want.
Nihilism. You said my new favorite word. Not favorite because it's a good word or a good affliction, but favorite because I don't know. It's fascinating, and I don't really agree with it. But moving on. So you mentioned productivity, and I mean, this is kind of a basic econ question, but what is productivity? What does productivity mean for a person? Is that a super cold, calculating way to analyze a person or a worker? Or like, what does it say about economic growth?
Yeah, so there's different kinds of productivity that economists talk about, and one of them is like, I think that you're referring to is like labor productivity. It's like, how much does a worker produce in an hour? And so you could take, like, say, all the economic output of the U.S. and the number of labor hours that went into it, and come up with a number of like how much every worker produced in an hour, or some subset too, right? Different kinds of workers and different kinds of output. The other way to think about it is that I prefer is total factor productivity. And so it's basically, instead of saying, well, labor is the only input that we care about, you say, well, what if we take a diverse basket of inputs, right? And it's just statistically valid, like sliver of the economy, and you say, okay, assuming we have these amounts of inputs, how much can you make? How much output can you produce? How much GDP can you produce with, if that's your basket of inputs, right? And so I think that's one of the best ways of looking at economic growth, is to look at total factor productivity. GDP has the flaw, of course, that you have to adjust for inflation. If you do that, you get real GDP, which still depends on population. So you kind of have to say, okay, well, let's take real GDP and let's divide it per capita. Okay, so you have real GDP per capita, and it doesn't adjust for the fact that you can work harder or longer. So we could increase real GDP per capita if we enslaved everybody and made them work 20-hour days. Maybe that would increase output, or at least some portion of the population. If you did that, it would increase output. But we actually, we care about the inputs too. We care about how much labor we have to employ. We care about how much savings we have to have, and how much consumption we get. And so total factor productivity is just I think, the purest way of looking at how an economy grows. And I think it's determined by basically just essentially two things. So one is over the very long term, you can think of it as like in part by ideas. So if you think about, why can we produce more today than we could 200 years ago? It's because we know a lot more science and engineering, and we have a lot more economic recipes that we can pull from. And then the other thing that really matters is institutions. The science and engineering knowledge, there's nothing that stops it from being used in other countries as well. But those countries don't produce as much, and well, why not? It's like, well, maybe the institutions aren't as good. Or you get like I give the example of Italy before, which has had declining total factor productivity, but not just Italy. Like Brazil has declined since about 1980. Venezuela has had a huge decline in total factor productivity. And why is that? It's because the institutions have deteriorated as well. So if you kind of think about, what are we actually trying to do? Is we're trying to get, more economic recipes that we can use, and that through better institutions, we're able to use them and cooperate in ways that enables us to use them. And so that's sort of the high level way, I think, of thinking about productivity and growth.
So then, you've talked a little bit about the red tape that blocks people from being able to enter new forms of energy production and stuff like that. But what role has the regulatory state played in this stagnation?
I think in energy, both energy in general and stagnation, energy in particular and stagnation in general, I think the regulatory state has been a pretty big factor. Certainly, in terms of the curve we were on in terms of energy consumption per capita until, say, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission was formed, was pretty good. It was growing at about 2% a year per capita. And if that had kept going, we would be at about 3%. About 3 times. We'd have about 3 times more energy consumption today. We'd be 75% of the way to this superabundance definition that I'm talking about. So we'd be almost there. And so that's been a role, that's been a player. As I said, NEPA has been just such a massive, underrated, and across every sector, but especially energy, has been a factor. And in other sectors, maybe it's different aspects of regulation. I think so. One of the poster children for stagnation that I care about is supersonic aviation. So supersonic flight means just traveling faster than the speed of sound. And we actually, if you look at sort of transatlantic speeds over time, we had the first commercial transatlantic route in 1939, which was, pretty slow. I don't remember the exact speed, but it was like 100 something miles an hour. Perhaps it would take you, almost, I think it took basically about a day to get across the Atlantic on an airplane. And then we had, from that we worked up to Concorde, which in the mid 1970s, you could buy a ticket and get across the Atlantic in 3.5 hours. And that's something you can't even do today. So why can we not do that today? It's not because we don't have the ideas. We don't know how to build supersonic airplanes anymore. It's because of regulations that make the entire supersonic sector, part of the market, not profitable. And so that means that nobody's making supersonic airplanes, which means that you can't buy a ticket on one. So it's been, I think regulations has been just a huge, not the only, but a huge factor in in stagnation.
And that example is one that's pretty directly affected by energy. But what about the sectors of the economy that are affected by these sorts of regulations and that would benefit from energy abundance that we might not think about and that might not come to mind immediately?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could say something like water policy, right, in the U.S., right, where we're taking we have all these um, rules associated with water usage, especially out west, that's built around the idea that water is going to be scarce, and if we were willing to just literally, it's just like a question of desalinating water, which we know how to do, building water pipelines, which we know how to do, pumping the water to where it needs to go, which we know how to do. If we were willing to just do that, water wouldn't have to be scarce, right? And you wouldn't have to have this big regulatory apparatus like governing the use of water. So, there's just so many interdependencies here between, so why aren't we doing that? Well, in part, it's permitting rules and so on, but I think it's also a lack of imagination and a spirit of that we can do things, and it's nobody's job to think through how exactly we could do this and how we should do it, and nobody's responsible for that implementing it or executing on it. And so I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that the point of the market, that you don't have to like put someone in charge of implementing it?
Yeah, well, this is something where there you could definitely imagine that we could adopt rules where somebody would spot the profit opportunity and decide that they could do it and they would do it. But that's not the system we have right now. There's no private actor that could conceive of this as a profitable business opportunity and do it without getting so much regulatory buy-in. You'd basically have to have the entire like the huge chunks of the government like buy into your proposition and agree to come along with you. It's not the idea of like the lone entrepreneur with the sort of the insight and just being willing to do it. He'd have to bring along the administrative state with him.
So, given that, are you optimistic at all for the future of energy abundance, superabundance?
I am, and like I said, I think surprisingly, it's I think it's being led by an actual sense of urgency that a lot of people feel to do something on climate as quickly as possible, and so there's a lot of investment going in on the R&D side, but there's importantly, I think there's just growing awareness of the nature of these obstacles, and so I think that there's sort of an adjacent movement that's had I think is a little earlier in the process, and that's the YIMBY movement. So if you think about the YIMBY movement, like especially out in California, where they've had a lot of legislative victories and they've succeeded in organizing to repeal at least some of the obstacles that are going into building new housing. I think you could think about the energy superabundance movement as a few years behind that, but I think it will be propelled by a lot of the same kinds of people who are interested in organizing to sort of create the world that they want, and that's going to, just as in housing, it's going to happen by getting rid of some of the regulatory obstacles.
That leaves me with a good amount of optimism that I did not have to begin with. So one last question. What is one thing that you believed at one time in your life that you later changed your position on, and why?
Well, I think it gets back to one thing we were talking about here, which is, or we were just talking about, which is the sort of how the climate movement was going to impact a lot of these things. So I think when I first started, 20 or more years ago, looking at claims and the movements around climate change, I was very concerned that it was going to be a lot of degrowth, right? And we certainly had some degrowth, so a degrowth movement that has formed out of the climate movement. But I think that there is this other faction that is growing in importance, and that wants to solve climate. Is very serious about solving climate, but they want to do it by building. They want to do it by building new energy plants, by driving down the cost of clean energy sources to where they're cheaper than fossil fuels, because ultimately that's the only way that you get other countries, especially poor countries that are very price sensitive, to adopt the clean technology. They're not going to sacrifice materially for for the benefit of the climate. They're already poor. They don't want to be even more poor, right? And so I think a lot of people have realized the need for abundant clean energy, and that's that's come out of the climate movement. So I've really made my peace with the climate movement. I'm not worried about degrowth winning in the end. I think that it's like going to be a force for good, that we're acting now to address the climate.
Once again, I'd like to thank my guest for their time and insight, and I'd like to thank you for listening to the Great Antidote podcast. The Great Antidote is sound engineered by Rich Goyette. If you have any questions, any guests or topic recommendations, please feel free to reach out to me at thegreatantidote@gmail.com. Thank you.